Welcome to Regulate This, a really unfiltered podcast.
Welcome to the next episode of Regulate This. You're here with Tracie Bear and my wonderful co-host, Leila Shaver.
What's up, everyone?
Today is an exciting day. Today we're going to talk about the first 100 days of a new administration. What does that bring for everybody, and what does that mean for everybody? So today will be a day to focus on what has happened over the last quarter.
A lot.
There has been a lot that's happened. What do you think, Leila, is one of the big things that's come out of the first 100 days for firms that should be on their radar if it's not?
So I think first and foremost, before we jump in, the discussion we're having today, I don't care what your political leanings are. If you're Republican, if you're Democrat, if you're Libertarian, if you're agnostic, the discussion today is really about what's happening and how we should be reacting, not necessarily like a political discussion, right? Like, I'm not here to take sides. The only side we're on is the financial advisor side, right? So it's about how to be able to respond to a new administration. Let's be real. There's always a transition that happens, regardless of what party's in control of the White House. There is always a transition when it flips from one party to the next during an administration change. So there's always going to be some shifts in focus. There's always going to be some shifts in a commissioner and how they want to handle the SEC and what they want the SEC's focus to be, and how to deliver results. At the end of the day, the measuring stick is the amount of fines, the amount of disgorgement, the number of suspensions and bars. So that's how the SEC kind of measures itself. Because remember, it's a federal agency. It gets a budget from Congress, and it works within that budget. So how successful it is based on how much disciplinary action they're able to conduct. So there have been a few things, right? So we have a new commissioner with the SEC. This is someone who has been an SEC commissioner before. He was actually appointed under George Bush, Papa Bush, not W. So he is someone who is got experience with the SEC. He's managed that agency before. He has experience. Unlike a lot of the heads of these different federal agencies, he's actually kind of a career securities guy, which is nice to see because that means he's bringing in his experience and his background to the position, which is great for the financial services industry. I think the other thing that's really great for the financial services industry is the fact that he is more focused on taking a more holistic approach to oversight over financial services companies. And in this case, we're talking about RIAs. So this is someone who looks at the firm, he looks at the people, he's looking at what kind of efforts the firm has made to get into compliance with different rules and regulations. So we're expecting to see fewer enforcement actions for kind of technical violations. Well, you technically violated this. I was talking to a CCO for a $5 billion AUM firm, and they got fined for over one statement on a website, which frankly, myself and other attorneys and consultants were like, we probably wouldn't have said anything in terms of that being violative of the rule. But they were fined over it. That is not something that would necessarily happen under this new commissioner. So I think that's a positive change. We've been saying for months and months and months that we're expecting the industry to kind of get the opportunity to take a deep breath and to take a beat, and not a beating, but take a beat and really be able to sit down and be like, okay, I don't have this fire hose of rules coming down my throat and all this extra guidance and all these enforcement actions I have to keep track of. I'm getting a little respite, right? Which means now's the time to focus on cleaning up your compliance program, not ignoring it. So let me throw that in there. So that's been like a really positive change. I think the other kind of things that have come out of the last 100 days, There's definitely been some just general policy changes about how to interact with other countries, how to change the relationships, whether it's trading, whether it's national defense, and those have had impacts on the markets, and not always positive ones.
Right. And I think what you said is really important because it's really about navigating the complexities that are ahead. And that's true no matter the administration, but it always has a state of flux when we go from one to another, even when they're in the same political sphere. You could have it go from one administration to another and have them be the same political party and still have some changes. So I think change is something that if you don't like it, don't worry, it's bound to change. If you do like it, don't worry, it might change too. That's reality of life and that's reality of business. So we have to put on our big boy and girl pants and we have to get out there and, be the professionals that we are and really look to guidance instead of fear, instead of the stewing in our head. I mean, I think all of us have had those moments where whether it's in the shower or the car or whatever quiet place exists, where our mind can just run wild and can convince us of almost anything. I've had whole arguments that I thought as a lawyer I was going to be able to convey, and then it never went that route. But I was totally prepared in my head, right? And it was a time suck. It's a waste. That worry and fear, what does that bring forth? Instead, it's what would you do if that happened? How would you navigate it? What are the things you have in place that would allow you to pivot? And if you don't have anything in place and you just assumed that, with a hope and a dream that everything would always be status quo, you're not living in the world, you're not even living in reality. So I do know that something that's coming out that I've heard from some of our clients, from people in the industry, from some of our staff in our compliance department and on our legal team, when they've talked about, the concern that some people have, other people might, be happy about it. I don't know. But there is some concern out there that they may be eliminating the SEC's oversight on some firms that have lower AUM. I mean, there's been discussion of 500 million. There's been discussions of up to $1 billion. They call those mid-sized firms. I think the fear that people have around that is that states vary from state to state. It's not one size fits all. Some states are a little more hypersensitive and more aggressive. Some states are going to analyze things tooth and nail, and the SEC maybe hasn't gone that in depth. So for some, it's the thought of going back to what they once knew and thinking that they had outgrown that. What are you hearing about that, if anything?
Yeah, no, you're right. There have been rumblings recently about the SEC looking at potentially regulating kind of those mid-sized firms back to state oversight. And I think it depends on the state, right? Like I was just in Florida visiting some clients doing branch audits. One of those firms, they're about 350 million in AUM, and they're just like, I don't want to go back to being supervised by the state of Florida. They annoy me. They are very fine, happy. Florida Office of Financial Regulations had some turmoil, and there's been some, political things that have come out of that office. So some states are like, I don't want to. But there are some states, I love Georgia, that are relatively easy to get along with. They take an approach of what have you done to try to fix the issues in your business, right? Like the state of Georgia is one of those states where the securities division really looks and tries to work with you to improve the program. Because at the end of the day, they're like, whatever you can do to improve will protect the investor. Then there's states like Massachusetts that they're very, in my opinion, overzealous, and they are just trying to make an example out of everyone. And so I think it just kind of depends on the state. So I know for some of the states that are a bit more difficult, a bit more active, a bit more strict, a bit more regulated, a lot of the mid-sized firms located in those states are not interested in going back to that state regulation. The other thing you have to consider too is that these mid-sized firms, they tend to be notice filed in several states. So it's very possible that if the threshold for SEC registration change, you still have that option. If you had to be registered in 15 or more states, you could be SEC registered. There hasn't been any conversation, at least that I've heard, that suggests that would change. So a lot of these firms that are that mid-sized RIA, right, between that 110 and a billion in AUM, many of them would likely fit under that SEC opportunity they would otherwise be required to register in 15 or more states. So I guess to your point, Tracie, there's the fear, right? But then let's actually look at what would happen. How likely is it that if that rule change went into effect and these mid-sized firms were regulated by the state, what would happen? The other thing to consider is the states. Not every state has the resources to just accept an influx of hundreds or thousands of firms that they all of a sudden have supervision over.
That's what I was thinking as well, that how can you, as a state, some of which are almost on, crisis mode with their financials and whatnot, they already don't have the capacity to do the things that they've agreed to do, and now they have to potentially take on more. How is that possible? Even if you're one of those states that is really detail-oriented, they're making sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed. Can you continue that level of vigor when you get an influx of 1,000 more that you have to do, or perhaps more than that? I know in an article that we just looked at that you and I were discussing earlier, it talked about how there's been such a increase in the amount of mid-sized firms that exist. So if you spread those out even across the United States and you've got 4,000 or 5,000 more in that category, even if they weren't able to stay with the SEC, can the state actually maintain and manage it? And can they do it at that level? To be determined, right?
Right. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that there are states who in the past have not regulated RIAs. So any RIA located in that state automatically had to go to SEC registration. Or you look at New York, they don't regulate firms up to 100 million. So even New York, which there is an abundance of financial services companies, RAs more specifically in New York, they only supervise firms that have AUM up to 25 million. So even if the SEC decided to change this rule, the rest of the states could be like, great, we're not going to regulate states more than 100 million. So again, I think it's one of those things. They're rumblings, they're ideas. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to come to fruition. Part of it, too, is what's just happened in the last 100 days, right? So we had the Department of Government Efficiency, is that what it's called? DOGE. Essentially we all heard about it. They had sent to a bunch of employees at these different federal agencies offers for essentially severance packages, right? Early retirement. So over at the SEC, roughly 500 people took the early retirement or the severance package. So you've got 500 people who just left the SEC, which means that they are looking at some severe cuts in certain departments because a lot of them were from enforcement, the investment management oversight teams. So there's that too. And that's kind of, in my opinion, prompting some of this discussion about whether the threshold for supervision should be changed. So things can always evolve, right? I think this is an administration we know from Trump's first administration. He likes to shake things up. He likes to do things differently. But how he comes in is never how he leaves, right? Those decisions and circumstances change and evolve, and we've seen him in the past change his mind. So I wouldn't take this as, so let it be written, so let it be done. It's a permanent thing. There's always opportunity for change and an evolution. We still have a lot of time left with this administration. But yeah, I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about that quite yet.
Well, and I know I also saw, good point well made by you. I also saw where they're starting to, and who knows if the SEC is in this group or not, but they're starting to offer second and third tier packages. So people that didn't take or bite on the hook the first time to say, I'll take it, are now getting a chance. If they didn't take it the first go around, they might get a chance to take it again. So there could be even more people that end up leaving some of these agencies and institutions, which also puts a bigger burden as a lot of that work gets pushed to the states or to other organizations. So very interesting. What about FINRA? Now, FINRA, I've been hearing stuff about as well, and I know that they tend to be a little more persnickety than the SEC. I'm trying to find a nice way to say it.
It's okay. You don't have to be nice when it comes to FINRA.
But I know that gives people, it elevates the blood pressure. It makes people a little bit more worried again, because they know that they tend to have more scrutiny on them if it's FINRA versus the SEC. So there's also been talk that, let's say that the states aren't just out there and it's not just the SEC that's out there, that now you thought you got away from FINRA and they are back and more bold. So where do you see that going, or what rumblings have you heard?
So again, because we've seen this kind of mass outflow of SEC personnel, they're experiencing shortages. One of the departments they're experiencing a shortage in is examinations, right? So as an RA firm, when you first get registered, you can expect generally within the first 24 months, you'll get your kind of initial registrant exam, and then based on your risk profile, which the SEC develops once they do that initial exam, they kind of set a cadence of how often they're going to come and examine your firm. Well, with all these people who've just left, many of whom came from the examinations team, the SEC is trying to figure out, well, how the hell do we do all these examinations now when we don't have all the personnel to get them done? And you have to remember, the SEC's fiscal year ends the end of September, and it starts October 1st. So, we're in May now. We're 8 months into the fiscal year. A lot of the firms that were meant to be examined, these things were, that schedule, the names of those firms, that was set a long time ago. So the plan was set many months before the administration change happened, many months before this mass outflow. They were not expecting to lose as many people from the SEC. So now they're scrambling. We started all these exams. Anyone who's been through an SEC exam know it's not a quick process. You're looking at generally minimum 4 to 6 months. So now it's like, how do we finish these exams? How do we wrap them up? How do we get all the examinations that we had lined up completed? And then remember, the SEC has the NBE initiative, the Never Been Examined initiative. So there are firms out there still, some of whom are our clients, that haven't been examined in 10, 15 years, who have never been examined. So, there's still those firms that the SEC is trying to get through as well. So what they've thought of is potentially tapping FINRA and getting FINRA personnel to help with SEC examinations. Now, anyone who's been through a FINRA examination knows that FINRA people can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. And I say this lovingly because we have 2 former FINRA regulators on our team. But, the FINRA examination process, it's much more rules-based rather than principles-based. It's much more frequent, and it's just a different type of experience.
I think the thing I'm hearing, or the running theme that kind of ties all of this together, is none of us know. None of us, if we had a crystal ball, we would be able to say exactly what's going to happen and how it'll play out and what the twists and turns will be. We'd have an opportunity to say, the tariffs, have they, only affected the market short term, or is it going to be long term? How is the interaction that we're having with other countries? How will that affect things? And I know that sends a lot of clients for financial advisors into tailspins too. But the truth is, you don't know what you don't know until you find out you don't know it. So until we find out anything, It's really just proceed ahead with caution, as you always should. Make sure you're in compliance. Make sure you have systems in place. Make sure that you have a good ear to bend if you need to. If have a consultant, that's a great thing. If you don't, there are plenty out there, us included. If you need more training or guidance, there are programs out there. I know we have Compliance University where, we'll train staff and we'll even train the people. We have a YouTube that's flourishing with lots of tutorials and videos, even beyond the topics of the podcast. Our website has a lot of resources, but there are lots of resources even beyond us. And knowledge is power. The best thing that you can do for yourself is be prepared. And if you do that, then whatever happens, you're going to be able to pivot. So with that, tune into us next time. Hear what we have to say about your clients, about your businesses, about the way in which you're moving and grooving. We're here to not only give you professional insight and guidance, but also to say what we see in the market and what we see with people constantly that are either our clients or calling to become our clients, or the 50,000+ people that get our newsletter that reach out to us with interesting tales of sometimes glory and sometimes woe. The best thing you can do for yourself is to be prudent, put things in place, be prepared. Anything that you have to say while we're signing out of this episode?
I would just say, I know that the first 100 days of the new administration, there's been a lot of volatility, and we've seen it in the markets. And I'm hearing more and more now, fear around spending money. This is not one of those things to cut. If you have a consultant, if you were considering a consultant when you were doing your 2025 plan, just because there's been market volatility, just because your revenue may have dropped some, that is not something you want to cut or decide to push off. Now's not the time. You have an opportunity here to, with this kind of break in regulation and the slowdown in enforcement, to put in the time and resources to clean up your compliance. Now's not the time to cut. If you're going to look for things to cut technology, cut things you aren't using, cut office space, right? Shrink your office space. There's a ton of other things that you can cut or reduce if you're looking for an effort to shrink your expenses. Compliance should not be one of them. You are already understaffed, I promise you. So, when we're talking about all these concerns and rumblings and things we're hearing and kind of all the changes that have been occurring, don't just think about the problems, think about the solutions. Don't stay in the fear. Look at this as an opportunity. Even if it makes you anxious, even if it makes you fearful, even if it makes you nervous, there are a ton of advisors who are going to fall into that trap of fear and shrink away. This is your opportunity to stand out. So do it.
Check us out on www.myralawyer.com. You can also find us on YouTube and anywhere that you get your podcasts. Listen to Regulate This. Until next time, peace out.
Look it up really quick. Pause.